Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's three prakim. Rambam Hilchos Tumas Tzaras, prakim Beis Gimel and Daled, beginning with Perek Beis. Quickly recapping what we learned in Perek Aleph. We are beginning to learn about Tzaras Ba'oir Habasar, and let me reframe it as follows: that first of all, a person has to have this afflicted area of his or her skin. That area is going to be either white or pink, right? As we learned, right? Beheres, se'es, and then the sapachas of beheres, the sapachas of se'es, or the pasuch, which means, yeah, it's taka very white, but if there's a little bit of red that's mixed in it, that's what we call pink. As we learned yesterday, this is going to be the beginning. So there is a mark of tzaras. Now, will the person become tamei or not? So we learned yesterday that you have to have one of the following three simanim in addition to the beheres, either seir lavan, or a michya, or a pisoyin. It's going to work out perfect. The hashgacha prat is that today, all of the three chapters, each one is going to deal in detail with another one of these three simanim. We are beginning with Perek Sheni. Perek Sheni is going to be all of the details regarding the white hairs, right? The seir lavan, which is one of the three simanim, that when you have a beheres, and now you have in it the seir lavan, now this person will become a metzoida muchlat. We will also have at the end of the Perek the halacha that we learn in the famous story of Rabbi Bar Nachmani, Bava Metzia Peiva, famous meaning the Alter Rebbe begins Tanya, right, regarding Rabbi Bar Nachmani Kagoin Anah Benini, even though like Pasek Pumei Megirsa, that story comes from a halacha that we're going to be addressing at the end of the Perek. Perek Sheni has 9 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. Says that Rambam seir lavan, right, the white hair, shu simen tumas tzaras. That is one of the simanim. We're going to focus about that exclusively in this Perek. First of all, even though sometimes we say the word in the singular, say arlavan, we really mean ein prachos mishtei sa'aris. Has to be at least 2 white hairs. Another detail, how long must they be? Long enough that you can cut them with a scissor. If they're not even that long, they don't count. If you have 2 hairs, one of them is longer than this minimum amount of nitalois bazug, but the other one is shorter, one doesn't compensate for the other. Or if one of them is black, one of them is white. Really, when you go to the ikar, when you go to the follicle, from where the hair comes out of the skin, it's only one. It's only that this hair gets divided into 2. Or if the ikar, the root, is black, it's only as it goes outwards does it become white. All of these cases, harei zeh tahor. And by the way, this is similar to the halachas we learned in the previous series of halachas paraduma, also that we go after the ikar. Now let's be consistent. If where the hair emerges from the body, there it's white, and the hair later becomes darkened. Halavan is only kol shehu. No, it's the hair has the shear of nitalois bazug. But the white part of the hair is not long enough for you to snip off the white. Doesn't matter. The hair is called the hair. The ikar is white. We follow the ikar, and therefore that person will be tamei, right? If 2 hairs, 2 white hairs. Halacha base. As long as they are inside this area of white/pink, even though there are other black hairs interposing between one white and the other, still, even if the area of the beheres was that minimum size of a gris mitzumtzum, and as we mentioned, it's really a square, 6 by 6 hairs. So even if that had the minimum size, and there is also a black hair, the black hair, so to say, takes up space. If you were to cheshbon in the black hair and you would deduct it off the area of the beheres, you would not have the right area. We don't do that. whether the white hairs are inside the white or pink area. In other words, they are completely surrounded by the white pink. Or they are mamish by the boundary. In other words, from one of the sides, there's no white, there's no beheaders beyond, doesn't matter. However, but if it's mamish outside of it, then and again, going back to the principle we learned in Halacha Aleph, look at from where the hair comes out of the skin. That needs to be within the area. But and if the hairs originate there, but they are bent, they're growing outside. So they are lying outside of it. Doesn't matter. It's bad. Everything is consistent, even if it's coming from outside of it. But they're going in within. Tuma, again, it's all about the Iker. It's all about the Iker. Halacha Gimel. Loiven hasa'arois mitam b'chol mara, unlike the colors of white pink that have to fit right to the Shtaim Shein Arbam, and then the pasuk, and on top of that, the shade of white of the hairs is irrelevant. Bein shoya levanis kasheleg, bein shoya levanis loiven, that are day of beyoser, they're not even as white as the thin membrane of an egg. A white is white. So all of us have some white in our beards. That's it. Halacha Dalet. Ein seir lovin siman tuma achiyu baguf habehedes, which means, and now you can say we just learned that. No. The Rambam is giving another nuance. Behedes, if a person has this behedes area, and inside of it, you have a boil. Guys, we're going to translate these words once because we're going to continuously learn about them, and then we'll just read them after this first time, all in the holy tongue. Or if you have inside the beheadis area a michva, which means burned skin, or a boihak. Remember, yesterday we learned that a shade of white that's duller than the krum beitzam is called boihak. In other words, you have a boyak inside the behedes, or if you have michias hashkin, there was a boil and now the boil area healed, or you have michias hamichva, or you have the burn part inside the behedes now healed. Now, none of this is taking away from the minimum amount of behedes needed. You have the behedes, but within the behedes, you have all of these different types of skin. And now, the two white hairs, right? In other words, it's within the boundaries of the behedes, but it's not on growing out of the behedes. It's either growing says the Rambam, Einon Siman Tumam. And this remains a behedes, she'ein b'seir lovin. And don't forget, guys, quickly recapping that even prior to having any one of the three simanim, either Seir Lovin or the Michya or the Pisoyan, nevertheless, once you have the behedes meeting all of the criteria that we learned yesterday, it has the minimum size, it looks deeper, meha'oyer, it's one of those four colors, or the pasuk, or the pink. In all of these cases, it's not that this guy is scot-free. They're going to be quarantined, right, musgar, to be revisited exactly 7 days from then, and a chanami. But you're not a mukhlat because you don't have a seir lovin. Afal pisha beheres makefes as ashchin. Oyes a michva, oyes a michiyasan, oyes a boya, sheyesh bohen shtei asuaris. So you would argue the two white hairs are within that area. Yes, they are, but they're not growing out of the beheres. Hey, in the middle of Allah Dalit, imoy ashchin oy michva oy michiyasan oy boya k'makefes shtei asuaris halavanis. Oy samach lembet sidan. Wow. So if all of these other types of skin, right? Now we're talking about are not only within it, it can be mamish adjacent to it. Or think about this, you have a beheres. You have one white hair growing out of a beheres. You have another white hair growing out of the same beheres. But in between these two white hairs, you have the shchid, michva, michya, boihak, etc. Weiter, Harei Elu Enam Siman Tuma. The Harei Beheres is like a Beheres, She'ein Bo Seir Lovan, and therefore weiter only asking. So if you have these two white hairs the way we describe them, and they're not rendering this guy into a muchlat because they're not coming out of the beheres proper, and now the shchin completely left, or v'habayek v'hamichya, shekifas asaras alavanis, or ismachas lamechol kanoisam. And when they left, in other words, in this, let's just speak about the shchin. When the boil left, what came in its place was not what we're going to learn about in the next chapter, not a michya, more beheres skin. So now the white is coming out of the beheres. So now the nimsu as will be observed by the Kohen either at the end of the first week or at the end of the second week. So here we say halei muchlat. Now let me explain just to appreciate this. Even though we're going to learn later in this chapter that if the white hairs precede the beheres, that person will not be rendered into a muchlat. But over here, my friends, the beheres came before the Seir Lavan. The problem is that the Seir Lavan is not growing out of the beheres space proper. Once that changes, since the general beheres came before the Seir Lavan, yes, muchlat. On the other hand, as we learned yesterday, guys, you're never going to quarantine a mitzvah more than 2 weeks. Remember that? 2 weeks quarantining in the beginning of COVID, all that came from the Torah, those klipinyakas. They took it from us. And now if it stays the same, you also become pater. Pater means that so far you're taught. We also learned yesterday that even though it goes away, but if something later develops, then you're going to become tamei and a chanan. Weiter, halacha vav. Ein seir lavan simon tuma, chetagdem habeheres es a seir lavan. That's key. First, the skin became discolored, white or pink, and then the hairs that were there black turned white, or then white hair grew out. As it says, which means that what caused the hair to turn white, that the illness first cut the skin and then it went into the hair. But at first he had white hair that has no siman tuma. And again, if you have the beheres, if it meets, like we learned, minimum size, amik minahar, the correct color, will be declared a musgon, but not a much. Halacha zay. Hoysaba beheres. Uba seyo lavan, and because of that, behuchad boy. So now this person is declared into a confirmed mitzvah. Then the beheres leaves. However, even after the beheres began to heal, and we're going to learn soon, when you begin to heal, now you're going to start the purification process. When the beheres left, the white hairs remained white. And the guy went through the whole, he's pure now. And then in that location, the beheres came back. But it's a new beheres. But where is it? In the same location as the first beheres. Now think about it. Did the white hair come first or did the beheres come first? That's why there's a doubt. You see, it's a good scenario. You can argue maybe it's still considered the beheres came first. And that scenario is what Chazal refer to when they say Sa'ar Pekuda. It's as if, Pekuda means a Pekadin. It's as if the first beheres left a Pekadin, the two white hairs, for the second beheres. As it says, which means this beheres turned those hairs whites. And not that another beheres, even though it was in the same location. Again, you had the exact minimum size of the beheres. And now you had the two white hairs. And indeed, now, what happened here is not that the beheres went away, but that half of the beheres disappeared. And because of that, that's it. That's called there's no more simanim. But you're getting now. We're going to a bigger chiddush, and now the chazar kachatzi gris b'makom zeh. What are you going to say now, my friends? See here, the two white hairs were preceded by the beheres. That part did not even leave. Still be paskin einam siman tuma. One beheadis. This was made white from the old one. And a chanami, half of the old one is here. But since that person was tired, so now only half came back. Half of a beheadis caused it to turn white. You can word it that way. Or it preceded the half, which is not good. And the final halacha test. All of the cases, guys, it's, it loizu avzu. Many b'shnaisin are that way. The first case you'll say doesn't look like a chiddush. I'm sure there's a chiddush here, but we're going to go menakal alakavi. Like, wow, even this, even that, and even the other. Beheres kechatzi gris and ve'ein ba klum, which is mamish nothing with nish. And the nolda b'tzida beheres kechatzi gris ubasara achas. And now adjacent meaning nothing intervening it. And in that second half of the bahed, now you have the baheres in the minimum size. In that second, there's only one here. I know you're going to say, of course, it's nothing. We're building up to something. Meaning, you only have now a baheres kigris. There is no simonim. One here is nothing. However, let's go to a greater thing. Baheres kechatzi gris ubasara achas. Now, in the first half of beheadis, that half came before the white here. So it's half and one. And now, now that beheadis expanded, now it has the minimum size. There's another half. And now in that other half, there's another white here. Here also, what do we say? That person is not a Messiah Mukhlat. You understand? Because the first white here was only preceded by a half of a beheadis. No, it has to be both of the white hairs have to be preceded by an entire beheadis. Now, even a bigger chiddush. Beheadis kachatzi gris, and in that beheadis you have two sa'aros. And now, beheadis kachatzi gris ubasara achas. Here also, bottom line is that the two sa'aros were made white from a half of beheadis. They don't count at all. Now, beheadis kachatzi gris ve'ein bo klum. This will be the contrast. And then you have another half of beheadis. And now it turns two white hairs, and the two white hairs is in the new half. I don't care. These two halves are together now. Because now that you have the other half, now you have a beheadis. If afterwards you have two white hairs, even though the two white hairs are only in the second half, that I don't care. And now the final scenario of halacha test. Again, hashgacha process. We're learning this out of Yutas Kislev, Tavshin Pei Gimel, and the Alter Rebbe in Perik Aleph quotes the Rabba Bar Nachmeni going on no Beinani, and the Alter Rebbe's kasha. How can a Beinani mean what it means in certain parts of the Torah? B'Shem Hamushal, someone that's half and half. When Rabba said, I'm a Beinani, and the Alter Rebbe quotes the story from Bava Metzia Pevav, where like Pasuk Puma Megirsa, and the Malach HaMavos was unable to take his life. And that's not only verbally talking Torah the whole time, which is also amazing, but it's also a quality of learning. You know, other Yidden that passed away while they were learning. How can you say the Malach HaMavos cannot take a Yid while they're learning? People passed away while they were learning. It's the Haraya that it's not just learning, there's learning and learning. So he was learning on such a high madrega that the Malach HaMavos couldn't take him. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe uses that as one of his proofs that a Beinani means something completely different as we learn in time. A Beinani is what most people will call a tzaddik, a person who's constantly machshava dibur u'maisa, always doing the right thing. Now, what was the story there? Let's go back to that story. So there's a machlokes bein, and these words are essential. Kuchabrichu and mesifta deraki. As we learn in Chassidus, what that means. Not the way people without Chassidus Pasha don't understand these stories. Okay. But okay, so Kuchabrichu and the mesifta deraki, we're having a machlokes in, since now that we established, Baheres, Koidim, Seir, Lovin, Tomei. Seir Lovin Koydem of had a star. If we have a suffix. Kuchabrichu said tar. Sifteriki said Tommy. Man Noichach Rabba Bar Nachmeni, because he was exceptional also in the dinam of Negoim. But that was the paradox there, that in order for him to opine, he couldn't be alive. That's why they sent him Malach HaMavos. And it happened to be that the Gemara says that right before the Malach HaMavos got him, he became aware of the kasha and he passed him tar. So when you read that story, you think, is that Oy Bazoi, we paskin like now. Why b'chlal do you need to have a rabba? So let's use the classic that Torah la b'shamayim, also b'ava metzia. So even though there's a machlokes b'rekia, you need to have a yid over here paskin, but he paskin taught. The Rambam does not paskin like rabba. And I'll tell you the case of Mishnah. Let's read the case. He explains personal pinigla why. So let's go. Sofek say love and kodam. Sofek aberes kodma. So paskins the Rabbim Tomei. Oigevalt. Now, when the Rambam is saying Tomei, he doesn't mean Tomei Vadai. We're going to have this a few times today. Tomei means Sofek, and there's consequence to that, but in Kanamakim. Now, why Tomei? So the Kesef Mishnah says that just like they needed to come down here to get a living person to paskin, because Torah la b'shamayim, when Rabbah gave that psak din, he was already not considered fully over here. That's the way that Rambam understands it. So even though his physical lips said the words tahar, he was already in the process of passing away. He was already paskening of something that's going on in the end of it. Interesting. Just to bring up that how many Hasidic stories that we have, that our Rabbeim, they shared during a Fabrengen, a question that was in the heavens, and the Taka needed the local Rav, and they were aware of what was happening, and they gave the psak, and that psak took hold, but because Mustama, they lived afterwards. That's what the Kesef Mishnah, since Rabbah said it while he was passing away, he no longer qualified to be the one that's Torah la b'shamayim. He's also already considered b'shamayim. So the Rambam rejects what Rabbah said. So you wonder, so why did Rabbah have to pass away? These are questions that we have no idea about. Very interesting. When you read the Gemara, you think that halach is like it. Man noichach Rabbah barachmeni. Okay, next. Perek Shlishi, like we mentioned, it's beautiful today because once you get the Seyar Tzoras B'Oira Basa, I use the words that I want to correct. It's not two samanim. Baheres, I'm not calling that a simon. Baheres is the 4 shades of white/pink, with the other 2 rules: minimum size, and it should look deeper than the skin. That's a baheres. Now, will it make a Matzoira confirmed? For that, you have to have, in addition to the baheres, one of the 3 simanim. Seyar Lovin, that we learned in the previous Perek base. Perek Gimel is going to be Michya. Michya will see that if in the middle of the baheres there is the healthy flesh, not a shchin, we learned in last chapter, Michva. No. Michya means healthy flesh. Now, there's going to be other specific rules regarding the Michya. When
you don't always do that, but that could be a sign.
Right? No, it's beheadus with Seyar Lovin. Correct. At the end of today's 3rd chapter, the Rambam is going to speak about scenarios where you have the beheadus and more than one simon. And then one of those 2 goes away. We'll see details in the next chapter. Let's go Perek Gimel. Perek Gimel is about Michya. It's very relatively easy, especially coming from Faradum. Perek Shlishi also has 9 halachas, beginning with halacha. Michya means lebedik. I love it. So we hope I bring it tonight. It's here. Chayes, in words, it's healthy. Ein ha-michya simen tuma. You can argue. We'll speak about this tonight. How can michya be a simen tuma? It's a big more lesson. I have a good story for that. Remind me. Ein ha-michya simen tuma. Just like the beheadus has a minimum size. Guys, let's remember, what's the minimum size? Gris hakilki, Adani. What did we say, Gris hakilki? The Rambam says it's an area, you square it, 6 by 6. 6 sa'arais, you look at your arm, if you have hair, and 6 by 6 hairs, that's Gris hakilki. Now, you have to have the size inside the michya of an adasha, a lentil. Also, not even though a lentil beteva is circular, here also midubas, everything is squared or larger. And what is that? Also, let's go back to the hairs, 2 by 2, a total of 4. Which is shtayim oirich shtayim reichem. Just to speak it out, guys, if you have a location that is 6 by 6, as we'll see, unlike the Seyar Lovin in the last chapter, we don't care if the Seyar Lovin is in the middle. We don't even care, we said, if the 2 hairs is mamish at the edge, meaning that if you go to that side, there is no beheadus further. Doesn't matter. It's still within. This michya has to be mamish in middle. What mamish in middle? There has to be at least, if you have 6 hairs. Now, what's eating up from the 6 hairs is 2 by 2. Just speak about the 2. Centered means you have two of non-michyot flesh, behead's flesh, to the right and two to the left. Two on the top, two on the bottom. That's what centered means. Now, if you have a very large behead's, you don't need for the michyot to be always exactly in the center. But you need to have on each side at least 2 hairs space of behead's. That's the meaning of the center. And if it's not centered, it will not be a simon, because that's what God says.
The healthy flesh is on the edge.
That's correct. Very good. So we said, first of all, the minimum amount of healthy flesh has to be 2 sa'arais, 2 oirech, 2 roichas. And furthermore, what does be'emsa mean? Now, guys, if you have the minimum size beheadis, the michya tak has to be center. As we said. In other words, we need for the beheadis to be yeseda ala michya roichat shtei sa'aris mikol tzad or more. Because don't forget, the beheadis can be much bigger. The beheadis can be a person's entire arm. Clearly, Danny, ain't no simon tuma. No, it's unlike the shtei sa'aris. Now, what happens if you have a sum total of michya, healthy flesh, in the beheadis, but it's not together? You have a little bit here, a little bit there. You're going to show you a basar chayka chardal. Chardal is a smaller natural being, smaller than the adosha. But you have a chardal here, a chardal there. You understand? Even though they're all in the middle, and even though you have beyond all of these mustard seeds, you have 2. It's not good. It has to be together. Beautiful. Halacha beis. Hamichya metama b'chol mara. Mamish like the Seir Lovin. In other words, what the point is, ben shoysa mara, michya means not that it matches the same color of the rest of my flesh. Tzoras looks sickly. That looks healthy. Now, whether it is adoim, even though it has like a reddish tinge, it's so amazing because we said that the beheadis can be pink. You we have to be trained in those matters. You look at that pink, you'll see that's not healthy. When you hear, I should have used that word yesterday because that's the pasuk. Think about it. How many people do we know that have these? Even people that I saw common, they have a little white, the skin loses color. There's a name for that. That's relatively common. But that's not pink. It's not as white as that. It's very rare. But pink, if you look good enough, you can find people with those samana. Just we don't look. Doesn't matter. That's called michya. It's as long as it doesn't match any one of the 4 or its pink version. Again, what does it mean, begufa? This is similar to what we learned yesterday, but the Rambam gives Gavaldic examples. Now, we already said it has to be centered. In other words, you have to have at least two of beheadis. You know, he means something more. Ketzad, beheadis, let's read here. Whoever has the chayin with the brackets, not the parentheses. Shohoya, be'emtso'ah. In the middle of the beheadis, you have a shchin. We mentioned this yesterday. We translate this on the Pedic base. Shchin, michfa, michya, oy boyhag. And now this michya, by the way, is not what we are referring to. Michya, betoich hashchin, oy betoich hamichva, or betoich michyasan, or betoich haboyhag. The word michya before means though it healed. It healed. In other words, you already had something else in it, and in that you have this michya afapi that the michya turns out to be be'emtza beheres einasim and tumam. By the way, this is like the white hair, mipnei shehi b'toich hashchin, or inside the michba, or inside the boyhak, or inside that area that healed, but it's not inside the michya. The michya that we are talking about has to be directly in the beheres, not inside something else that's within the beheres. Guys, let's take out the word S and we're going to read the word oy. Oy mechyasai, right? V'amichva. Oy mechyasai v'aboyek. Es hamichya. Oy shenismach echad mehem lamichya mitzida. Oy shechalak echad mehem es hamichya v'nichlis l'toicha. Mamish like the white hairs. Enesim and tumam. V'harezu like a beheres that has no simen None of the three simanim. So taka, anytime you have a beheres, it'll be yaskid for one and then another week, but that's it. Similarities. So you had beheres, guys. In it, you had a boil. In the boil, you had a michya. That michya doesn't count. Now the shchin goes away. Now the michla goes away. Now the boil goes away. Or it was betzil shemakifin. And now, whatever was before that disallowed the simon to take hold, like we had in the last chapter, now when you look at it in the next week, you have a michya within the beheres directly, yes, and if it didn't heal after the second week, then always yiftar. Yiftar means the person is declared tahor. Unlike the here that the Seir Lovin, which means two, needs to come after the beheres has to receive the Seir Lovin, not so by Michya. HaMichya Siman Tumah La'olam. Bein Shekadma Michya Sabeheres. Bein Shekadma Beheres HaMichya. Why? Because the source of the skin being pre-white hair came from the words Fihi Hafcha. These words are not written when it comes to the Michya. So we don't say that. It doesn't make a difference. In other words, the word Vihi Hafcha is written in the same pasuk with both the Seir and the Michya. You have to put a comma. It doesn't go on both. This precondition of it turning the other simon. Both Laseir Vilamicha Nish Tazoy Lakeman the pasuk. Elokolechad Mehem Simon Tuma. Then Loinemar say 11 Imamichya. Why did the Torah put it together? Elalitan Shir La Michya. Kadei Shetei Kadei Lakabel say 11, which means Shtei Sa'aris Kabbalik. Why did the Torah juxtapose them? Because, like we mentioned, even though it's an Adasha, but we said it's not circular, it's Dafka 2 by 2. And since we know that Seir means plural, that is a way of the Torah being Marames, the size of the Michya. Halacha Hef. Beheres. Like we mentioned, it has the minimum 6 by 6 hairs, and weiter michya ka'adosha mitzum 2 by 2, and it's stuck in the middle. So you have beyond the 2 by 2, you have on each side another 2 of beheres, and indeed there is a muchla. Now, what happens since everything is exact? If nismata beheres, how nismata beheres? Either the outer perimeter of the beheres became smaller, you got it? Or the michya grew, because when the michya grows, you have to have at least 2 from Mikol Tzad. You don't have that anymore. Or when everything is exact, it's easy for things to change. Sometimes for the worse, but here for the better. Because we don't say since that person was already declared, we're not so medagdek in the minimum. The minimum shiurim always remain. If it doesn't meet it, you're good. Now let's go in the opposite direction. So he comes back to the kohen. The kohen takes a look. There's takia michya, but it doesn't meet the minimum amount. And therefore the kohen, either if it's at the end of the first week, there's still a beheres, will be masgid for 1 more week. Or if it's at the end of the second week, they'll tell him you're putter to go home. But now, we learned this in Perek Aleph. Even after the 2 weeks quarantine, when you're told to go home, it doesn't take away everything that's there. There isn't enough to make you tummy, but it's still there. The moment the circumstances change, compound it with what was in addition to what you have now you'll be declared muchlak. Nismata hamichya mimasha hoisa. Oisha holchala. Hareizu kamoisha hoisa. And the ein kan simen tumam. Halachavav. By the way, we're going to see in a moment that Rambam writes it either in this chapter or in the next chapter. You know that once you're declared musgar, the kohen is going to re-see you in a week. During that week, there can be a lot of changes. Even if today with the machinery, you'll record it, doesn't have any effect. It's what happened in between the kohen told you to be quarantined until when he sees you next, we won't take into account. It's when the kohen sees you on the 7th day of the first quarantine. Okay, halachavav. The head is that's bigger than it is. Uba michya, you say to Mikadosha. The rabbi shenasmatu, but it didn't affect each one having its minimum size, your tummy. ובלבד שלא יסמאי בהרס מכגריס, ולא תסמאי המחיה מקדושם. And ולא תקרב המחיה לסויפה בהרס בכדי צמיחה שתי סעודס כמו שביארנו. הלכה זין, בהרס כגריס, ובוסר חי קדושם, או יוסם מקיף מהחוץ. Okay? So here it's the opposite. Here it's the opposite, guys. Not that the michya, guys, halkop is inside of it. The michya is around it. Now, people are going to argue, and you think about it, isn't every beheadus that way? Yes, but hold on. What happened is that you have an inner beheadus. If everything would stay the way it is, of course, every beheadus has around it, the healthy flesh. The beheadus has a certain size, not more. But so there remained a michya flesh, and around the circle of healthy flesh, it's like a double rainbow. There is another circle now of a beheadus. So there's different ways of looking at it. One way of looking at it is that now it's all one groisa beheadus. Within it, you have a michya. We don't look at it that way. If first you have a beheadus, that beheadus is beheadus number one. If there's no michya in it, it's a beheadus that is powerful enough to make you quarantine. Then you have an outer beheadus. Within that outer beheadus, this circle of michya will be the michya. So in other words, we're going to view this as you have two behedusim. The inner one is only enough to be masgir you, and the outer one is going to be machlit. But we have to look at it that way because, as we'll see, if something changes, what will be your status? Let's go. And now, we don't look at it as one beheadus. We look at it as that you have two behedusim. The beheadus has no michya in it, and no seir lovin, and no pisoyan so far. No, it's the inner beheadus only makes you quarantined, which is also something. We will view the outer beheadus as having in it the michya. No, it's the michya is not scattered. See, if like I said, if there's a chardal here and a chardal polka dots, that's not good. Here it's a whole ring.
Why do I have to mention the inner one?
We'll see in a moment. So now, in other words, it's all together. It has the minimum size of the 2x2 hairs. So so we view the circle of the michya to be the simon in the outer one. And therefore, Danny, what don't we say? We don't say it's one beheadus with the simon. No. Therefore, the smite how did it completely disappear? So there's different ways. Either the inner one became bigger, or the outer one crushed in. Now becomes which means that right now you're back to a beheadus that is enough to be masgir you. Okay. Remember learning this in Cheder?
Yeah. When the inner one grows, that's not enough to be mocha.
That's not enough to be mocha. No,
usually it would be. Inner one grows makes the
okay, so Rabbi, so Dovi is saying something very important. I think that we're going to learn the next chapter, the Pisoyim. And the fact that the Rambam is writing that one of the ways that the ring of the michya disappeared is because the inner one grew. Yeah, very good. That's the whole word. That's the. We're going to learn in the next chapter that Pisoyim only means growing out. So even though we look at the inner one as a separate one, but once they combine, they become one. That's another layer.
It's not called growing
and
out.
It's not called Pisoyim. Wait, thank you. Now, one second. This halacha, sometimes you remember when you learn something wrong. This is not my fault, but my teacher, who I love, remember this. This halacha is to be corrected by my mind. Remember. I remember in Cheder that if you look, there's at a tip of one of your limbs. Since it's so, it's so curved, it's difficult to look at it all at one time. I never got that. I remember as a kid, I heard it's not again that when you look at there's a beheadus at the tip of your Rosh Yevarim, you're not going to be called a Mitzvah. No, it's not that. michya on the tip, if I have the minimum size or more of a beheres, my finger, lamash, that's only muskar. To be machlerit, I need a sinner now of michya. That's the chapter. What happens if the michya is exactly on the tip? With the minimum amount. We view this michya to be dividing the beheres into two parts. Even though they're not really divided. Since it's like on one side of the finger, on the other side of the finger, it's such a curved area, the michya will not render that nega into a nega that's going to be machlit you. It's actually going to break the beheres, not even to be a beheres. We'll define which evarim we are talking about. And now you have the michya be'emtza beheres. The key is it's beroish ever. The din is ein siman tuma. Why? Bepnei shahamichya choylekes es hanega. That's the way we view it. And the nimtza miktsasa shefei aver mikan, miktsasa shefei mikan. And since it says v'roa kohen means sheyir roya hanega kol ka'achas, that it should appear to the kohen as one entity. It will appear to a viewer as two entities. Not because the michya physically divided it into half. It did not. You have on each side of the michya at least the two sa'aros of beheres. You have that. But since the michya is at the tip, now the Rambam is going to make it clear. If a person has very big fingers, and on the tip itself, you have enough room to have a michya, and still on each side to have the area of two etzba'is of beheres, all, so to say, on the tip, that person will be a muchlat. Speaking about most people, it's not, we don't have that much space, especially if the michya is bigger than the minimum amount. So the michya goes to all of the sides. Even though you have this ring, you're not going to be considered. You're not. It divides the beheres into half. That's 20. The tips of your ears, it's all the same. It's the finger is from all sides. It descends. The ear is the same thing because if you have you shouldn't show on the body. If you have a tzoras on that area and then you have on the tip, so you have to look. You see on one side, you see on the other side. You see the beheres on separate sides. The heads of the ears, the tip of the nose, the tip of the atara. And the Rashidadan Shalisha, Abel Rashidadan Shalish, which is not as curved, or if a person has a wart, or if a person has certain types of blisters. No, we don't say that over there. Mitamin b'michyon. And the final halacha says, Kol Rashi Vadim Elu, Shoyim Karim Yoshev Kegris, but Bemet Varam Amurim. The person is, is not Oig Malachavash in size. And on top of that, the amount of michya, mamish covers the whole tip. So when you're looking for the beheres, you have to look at it down on the incline part. But if a person has very wide tips, then metamim ben agoyim. Sometimes people also are very flat. If they're rounded, it has to indicate it. For example, beheres kigris. He wants to give examples just to make it real. Is when you have everything is a minimum amount. Or Beroish's boy. Sheifas elach ve'elach tahor. Okay, he's just going back to what he was speaking about before. Shenamar v'roa koyen achireu kol ka'achas.
It says nose, it means the outside and inside.
No, it means the tip of the nose. So if I understand correctly, Itar means that he had a beheres, musgar. Then the michya came on the tip of the nose. Since this is considered to be breaking the beheres into half, it's nishnor. Not only do you not have a michya, but if you begin with a beheres of the minimum size, now it broke it into half. Now you don't even have the gris. So you're completely taught. Not only does it make a problem, if it's at the tip, it breaks it into two parts. Now, if a person had a beheres on the size of 10 grisim, so the michya on the tip won't make you muchlad, but you'll still be muskar because you have a beheres kegris. Okay, goodbye. Today's final chapter is now the third siman. The third siman is called pisoyoin, which means expanding. Here it's clearly, even though we said in Perek Aleph, you have to have the minimum 6 by 6. If someone comes to the kohen lachatchila, that was 6 by 6, but 36 by 36, doesn't matter how big it is. Since he doesn't have any one of the 3 simanim yet, when he comes back the next week, we have to see if it grew. Doesn't matter how big it was, how much it grew, as we'll see. If it grew, now you have the pisoyim. We will also have in this chapter, like we mentioned, in this chapter, other kolalim that are connected to all of the 3 chapters. The ikir will be what happens if after a person has the baheres, he has more than 1 siman. And then one of those disappeared. And as we'll see, will be machmer. We're not going to say, since right away you came with 2 simanim, now it's getting better. No, if you have the baheres with the simanim, even though it's going in the right direction, you're still going to remain muchlat. As we'll see inside Perek Levi, today's biggest chapter relative has 11 halachas. Halacha Aleph zok the Rambam ha-pisoyoin, expansion. Metame b'chol shehu. By the seir lavan, we had the size of the hairs. Nitalim bezuk. By the michya, we had the lentil. Not by pisoyim. V'hu b'med dvarim amurim shehiya ha-pisoyim ma'achas mimaras hanegoyim. So we spoke about the baheres, the sapachta. Says sapachas. And then you add to that the pink. We're going to call that the shtaim shemar. So if you have one color flesh and you have in middle, not you. Someone has a neged sodas, and it expanded, but the color of the expansion is, even if though it's not like your regular flesh. So when you look at it, you'll see how it's growing. It's not yet from these 4 maras. It won't make your tummy. It has to be a mara that is matami. Avalon have to say mara boyhak. Boyhak means it's not like your regular flesh, but it's lighter, it's dimmer than the krum beitza. Ein apisoyin. The ein apisoyin simen tuma ad sheyifshe chutz lanega. That goes back to what we learned yesterday, the last Perek. Even though I worded it, maybe I have to change the wording, that the inner beheres is called the beheres. Oh, it's the expansion has to be outside. Once you have one beheres, the pisoyin has to be outside of it. Avalon pasal otoicha nega. For example, beheres. Ubetoicha basar chai. Now, basar chai, you're a tamei. No, the basar chai was less than a kadosh. So that michya is not a siman tuma. The point is that you did not have all of it filled with the sickly skin, and therefore the kohen made you v'hizgira. And at the end of the week number 1, or at the end of week number 2, nismata hamichya mimashohisa. Either it got even smaller or it completely disappeared, meaning it was replaced with more beheaded skin. No, that's inside. Farvos, that's the meaning of this first rule. She'ein habehedes poisa litoicham ela chutzalam ufaratzta out. Zelu umazeh halacha beis. Ein apisoyin simen tumam achiyah achar hesbet. Like we said, a beheres is the minimum size of a 6 by 6 sa'aris. Okay, a person, you're in this, nefesh behemta. You look at your arm, whatever. You look at any oid habasar, and you see oid gavalt. I have saras. By the time you went to the kohen, doubled. You're being honest. It doesn't mean anything. When the kohen saw it the first time, that's what he looks at. And if you don't have any of the simanim, so he tells you, okay, quarantine with the consequences. We didn't learn yet what's the consequence of Tumah. We'll learn about that soon. Okay, when you come back on the 7th day, the kohen looks at it the first time. He looks at it. We have very similar halachas when it comes to midah, and it's very practical because many times when the color of the mada is a borderline, when it's moist, people who know what they're looking for, it's going to look tummy. If you are saying that I'm not qualified to see it from, I have to show it to a Rav, and by the time you came to the Rav, the shade changed, and you tell the Rav, I want to tell you that when I looked at it, it was a person who has some understanding. Doesn't make a difference. It's what you look at it right now. He's saying something even more great. What happens if the kohen has the koyach to see the nega growing while he's looking at it? Also not That's not called pisoyin. That's what he's saying, right? He's looking at it, maybe he's tapping the shmuz, he's like the chazing psadvar treidom, and he looks at it again. Oh, it's bigger. You have to wait between muskar and muskar is a week. We had like bite that again. And what happens if I have a beheadis? If someone has a beheadis, Chaim Yankel has a beheadis, and around the beheadis you have a shchin around it. So we are fulfilling the condition of halacha aleph. It's going outwards, but it's not going outwards into a place of healthy skin. Or you don't have a boil, but you have it's by the border with your hairline, if you still have a hairline. And now it's going into your hairline. Better. Even if the Rambam speaks also about even if the person no longer has the hairline, but it used to be the place. It has to be in a makim ma'oid. Since boyak halachically is healthy skin, then yes, hareza pisoyon. Now halacha dalit hashchin a boil again a michya burnt flesh the boyak the not too dim of a white umichya hashchin or the area where there used to be a shchin and now it healed or there used to be a burn and now it healed. Sheho yocholkem esho oim la pisoyon. Guys, oim meant the mama. Mama means the original. So you have the baheres. Around the beheadis, you have a shchin. And now, beyond it, it's expanding. It's expanding outwards, but there's a hefsek. Ein noisim and tuma. But if he's giroi, and week number 2, the max, which is you come back. That's important. He looked at you. He looked at the person the first week. It was 6 by 6 hairs. Happened to be that punct around it was a shchin. He looked at you at the end of the first week, and around the area of the boil, now you might have. So it's not right because it didn't come out directly. At the end of this second week, it didn't go further out. Here it got diminished. Here we say it's at the sun. Why? Because he looked at you the first week. It was only one size. Now it's bigger. Last week there was something separating it. That mania is no longer here. So even though in this case it physically taka from week 1 to week 2 it grew in reach, but that whole ring around the original is outreach.
The boil healed, now it's gone.
That's also
It's in the place of the boil.
It's in the place of the boil. So the point is that when you came the first time to the claim, there was nothing beyond the boil. So it did expand. The reason why we couldn't say that you're mukhlat, because there was something being mafsik. That hefsik went away. Halachek, beheres, kigris, at minimum size. And ufasasa, it grew, kachatzi gris, v'oid, guys, that's key. The kaibel means, even though you only need to have a pesoyin kolshu, it grew, whatever was the size, 51% more than half, but at the same time, yidin, you're covering all the bases. You know, you began with the size of a gris. When you look at them in the second week, you have gris and a drop. But the pshat of this growth is that more than 50% of the original went away. So now you have the sum total of a growth, but since it's the roiv of the original went away, is more than the gris. So there is a growth, there is an expansion. It's all because of the roiv. If it would be 50-50, how great is this? But now it's not called pisoyan. Expansion means you have the ikir and now you have a growth. Once the ikir is nishdam, hareza tohoy.
Even if it grew 10 times the size.
If the original, very good. Sakanuba heres, that's the key. If the original one is gone, it's not called growth.
So is it pure or it's now a new?
Now he's a yid mitabaheres without any of the simana. Question is, how many weeks are you going to be? I think 2 weeks. I think that I'm right. I think it's viewed like if it's a new baheres, then they can be musgar. Go. Now, hoya kigris. Again, he's just giving it exactly. Ufasa sa kigris v'oit. And it grew more than a gris. The growth itself is a gris v'oit. And the entire oim went away. Same thing over here. No, it's you have now a blemish larger than the gris, but it's not the same one. Teiro batchila. Teiro batchila means it's a new baheres. It's a new baheres. We already established that hochel ha'oy means chayra, more than 50%. That's the point. So, and therefore, the yasker shavua achash. That's what the Rambam is saying. Now you begin nachamo, and the point is that now you have 2 weeks of Hesker, because if you have the Baheres without any of the 3 simanim for Shvuayim, the Kohen is going to tell you go home. You need 2 weeks. Toisa by Baheres viz giroi, the whole Chaberes was saving Hesker, and the Chazra Baheres by Mekoy Shoisa, which means that the not that the Kohen looked at you when it was gone. If the Kohen would look at a person when it's gone, and he would tell you patur, now you have a new baheres, even though it's in the same place. That's a new baheres. New baheres meaning now you need to have 2 weeks. There's a possibility of 2 weeks of Hesker. Here, the baheres, I showed it to the Kohen. It went away. By the time I came back, it came back. That's what we were saying, that it's about when the Kohen looks at it, which means that you have a baheres without a simon, you are already 1 week in the quarantine. There's only a possibility of only 1 more week of Hesker. The point is, it's all about the size of the blemish as it appears when the Kohen looks at it. That's the key of halacha. Halacha Baheres kegris. And then upasasa kegris, it means it doubled in size. It doubled in size. Inside this added baheres, which is connected adjacent, now you have no chasimin, either a michyam or a seder lavan. But now the whole chaloha, the din is teira batchilam. He saw last week 1 beheadis. Now we're seeing another beheadis. So if he's looking at that the first time. Now, by the way, if you look at a nega the first time, if you have side the beheadis and one of the simonim, you'll be declared muchlet right away. Okay. And now b'seif hashavua, it's in the size of a sela. A sela is much bigger than the gris. Sofek, he Sofek shiacheres batachteo. So the din is hareza tamei.
What? How do they have that down? You didn't remember where the original one was?
Yeah.
The Rambam's not telling us what the system is for the claim to know if it's a growth or not. They didn't have,
Picture photos. So the way he remembers, he makes a money. Okay, just to know that l'chayda tummy here means tummy misatik. In other words, you have to remember this, that now that we established that even if there is a pesoyan, what did we learn in the last few halachas? A pesoyan means that halachically the first nega is there, and now it grew. When something grows, it can double in size, but sometimes if 50%, more than 50% of the original is gone, I know this is a problem, but it doesn't mean that you're muchlat. So here there's a suffix whether you're musgar or whether you're muchlat. That's what the tummy means. Halachazai. Baheres kegris, and aside of it having the circular size, or the 6 by 6, the square, It was a stretch of Beheres flesh, but that stretch was not 6 by 6. It was only wide 2 sa'aros. That stretch, Danny, is considered Beheres enough that if in it you have the 2 seir lovin, you'll become a muchlat. If that little strip expands towards any side, b'chol shehu, you become a muchlat. But there can't be a michya because we said that a michya is only if you have around the michya, at least mikol sad, the area of 2 sa'aros of the beheres. You don't have that in a strip. And the year being soif michya was at least if you have 2 baharas and they were connected with the strip, again, the strip that we are talking about is very narrow, but that strip is also of afflicted bahara skin. Then we combine them. All the nafkaminas that we had before. So if you have at the end of the circle to the right, you have the michya. There's 2 on top, 2 on the bottom of Beheres, 2 on the right side, but 2 on the left side. Since we consider it 1, yeah, you have 2 on the left side. Or if you have 1 here in each, a very good example. So since 2 here, as we said in today's Pedic base, no matter, they don't have to be coming out together. Since it's considered 1, it's considered a fleck. Muchlat. I'm sorry. Nothing changed. Then he says you're tahar. We had this in Pedic Aleph, I think. Now we don't say since the coin send you home. So now if you come back and it's bigger, you're starting 0 kilometer. We don't say that. He sent you home because you cannot be muskar for more than 2 weeks. But the coin has to remember how big it was. Because if you come back a month later and now that became bigger, you're right away going to be muchla. If you come lechatchila to the coin, we said with a large beheres, that's the beginning point. It's like oinas haflogam. Oinas haflogam is only shaykh if you have two vests. You get married, the first chas and kala, the first cycle, you have to have 2. You have the original and now the new one. You still have the original one. Beheres shetuaro metoicha hesken. Because that beheres that had the simon and was declared pure, whoa, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we won't count it. It means that when you come back, you will never be told musgar. You know, you'll be called, like for example, a guy has a nega 1 week, first time. Next week, it didn't grow. None of the second week, none of the 3 simanim. The kohen told you, "Gay gesundheit, go home." Now it became bigger. You came back. You're not going to be musgar. There's no such thing as musgar. Once whatever is enough for you to be patered because you didn't go from musgar to muchlat. What cannot happen is you cannot come back and be told musgar. You're going to come back. Either you'll be muchlat or you'll remain tar. Halacha 9. Beheres shekonsa acher apturu fasas alich ma'ishahisam. It was big. It was small. It now grew. You were made muchlat, and now it grew back. Didn't grow back. Disappeared. Now you're back to your kigris. Oisha pasas alich chazik ma'ishahisam. Hareyu b'tarasai. Okay, I'm sorry. You were inspected 2 weeks in a row, and it didn't grow. So you were told to go home. And then after you went home, Danny, it got smaller. And now it's bigger, but it's only like the original size. You will not be told, you'll not be made tummy. Which means from here until the end of the chapter, he will have more than 1 simon. So you have simon number 1. That in itself will make the coin tell you tummy. And also the Seir Lavan, b'toicha michya. Now here it's interesting because Seir Lavan, b'toicha michya, if you remember today's Pedic base, that is not a simon at all. Because the Seir Lavan, right down, he has to come from the Beheres. But the Echlitoi, why the Echlitoi? Because You got yourself a you got your michya. The michya went away, but now that the michya went away, now you have seir lavan, which is great. So you'll remain tamei. Tamei b'nei seir lavan. Halach seir lavan. Tamei michya. Hoya haseir halavan b'teicha b'heres. V'holach haseir halavan tamei b'nei michya. Hol chamichya tamei b'nei seir lavan. No matter what, when you have two simanim or potential two simanim, even though you're going in the right direction, because now there's one siman less, so what? Halacha Yudalef, the final halacha. Baheres uba michya upisoin. Another example, right? You have the two. What are the two simanim? That there's a michya. Right? You came the first week, there was just a baheres. You come back the second week, at the end of the seventh day of the first hesked, say you have a healthy michya and you have pisoin. And now you remain tummy b'nei pisoyin, or halacha pisoyin tummy b'nei michya. V'chein b'seir lavan upisoyin. Ichlita b'seir lavan v'halacha seir. Okay, no good. Now another case. If you only had seir lavan, v'halacha seir. V'choza b'seir lavan acher. Another white hair grew out, or you were only muchlated because of the seir lavan. Then noidad la michya or pisoyin. Or you were only muchlat because of the michya, and now the michya went away, but the nolded loy michya acheres, oy seir lavan, oy pisoyan, or you were only muchlat because of the pisoyan, and the pisoyan diminished. The chazer by pisoyan acher, or nolded loy michya, oy seir lavan, in all of these cases are they zebetumasik and shois. Echad hatomei shehuchlat batchila. Which is when you come to the coin with a beheres and with any one of the three simanim. Or if you were only muchlat the last second, or even after the ptur, whether you were muchlated because of two simanim and one went away, whether you were muchlat from one siman and that siman went away and another siman came, it doesn't matter. In all of these cases, that's clear. Gewaldig.
When does the guy come out of Tumah?
Once.
Like, if he still has it for a year, does that mean he's a Mitzvah for a year?
Sure. People will surrender their whole life.